Greetings everyone, it is a pretty clear morning here in southeast Georgia. When I went on my little warm-up run from a workout, I could see all the stars except for one little patch where there's just a big old cloud. It's covered up in the moon. It would look real nice. You know, it's real nice getting out early in the morning, really any time of the year here on the coast. Just because I feel like it's always just so much more clear. And even though, it's kind of light polluted, the entire east coast of America from the Keys to Maine, it still does look pretty nice. But they had the talks yesterday. The Zelensky, European heads of states came to the White House, came to D.C. They buttered up Trump as best they could. They slobbed on his knob pretty crazily. And there's a few quotes that were a little interesting, but I'm sure they'll cover that a little bit on the news today. So let's hop into it.
Georgia and New Hampshire are the only states that don't offer a need-based scholarship program of four-year public colleges and universities. It's GPB.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Grovel Coleman. President Trump says he's planning for a meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump spoke after meeting the Ukrainian leader at the White House yesterday and then meeting with several other European leaders. All are focused on ending Russia's war in Ukraine. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says up to 30 countries are willing to work with the U.S. to help offer Ukraine security guarantees. Starmer says any agreement must include Ukraine.
Of course.
Territory or the exchange of prisoners, or the very serious issue of the return of the children. That is something where Ukraine must be at the table.
President Trump says he also wants to set up a trilateral meeting with the Ukrainian and Russian leaders, along with himself. A senior Hamas official
he wants to be at the table so he can add to his list of wars.
The move comes as Israel is gearing up for a major military offensive into Gaza. NPR's Jackie Northrup reports from Tel Aviv.
Hamas came under heavy pressure from Egypt and Qatar to accept a deal and said there would be rounds of negotiations if and when Israel accepts. The terms of the proposal are similar to one recently put forth by President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff. It included the redeployment of some Israeli troops and more humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Israel had previously agreed to it, but since then the government has been preparing for an offensive into Gaza City.
Yeah.
An anonymous person in Israel
What's the point of these ceasefire, peace talks?
The government received Hamas's response from mediators and is studying it and would respond. Jackie Northam, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The strike against Air Canada is over. The union representing 10,000 flight attendants and a carrier both say they reached a tentative contract to bring overnight. The deal must still be approved by the workers. They walked off the job last weekend, snarling thousands of Air Canada flights. They even defied a government order to go back to work. The Texas Health Department says the measles outbreak is over. Texas Public Radio's Gabriela Solario has
until next year.
The outbreak of measles in West Texas reached 762 cases before the state declared the outbreak over. It originated in a West Texas county in January, and the cases quickly rose. But now it has been more than 42 days since a new case was reported. 2 children died in connection to the outbreak. Both were not vaccinated against measles. 99 people were hospitalized. Texas officials say just because the outbreak is over here, the threat is still very real due to ongoing outbreaks across the country and globally.
Yeah,
monitoring
that's why you should get vaccinated.
Will continue. I'm
It is the only way to prevent measles, besides strict isolation.
The Justice Department says it's named Missouri's Attorney General as the new co-deputy director of the FBI. Missouri's Andrew Bailey will move into the job to serve alongside current FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who's a former Secret Service officer and podcast host. There's usually only one FBI Deputy Director at a time who runs the day-to-day operations of the agency. Forecasters say Hurricane Aaron is slowing down.
Maybe Bongino wants to go back to his podcasting job.
115 miles per hour. Aaron won't hit the East Coast, but it will still kick up life-threatening rip currents and surf along the East Coast. Fish may experience something akin to pleasure, according to scientists, and fish appear to work rather hard to feel it. Ari Daniel explains.
The team of researchers wondered whether fish could feel good.
Makes sense.
In the lab, they studied butterfly fish and a wrasse that cleans parasites off other fish. The butterfly fish preferred being where it interacted with the wrasse, even when it had no parasites. When the butterfly fish was injected with naloxone, a drug that blocks opioid receptors, it lost interest in the cleaners, suggesting there may well be pleasure involved with the massage.
And that this is mediated by those natural opioids in the brain.
Kyle Maximino is a neuroscientist
that makes sense.
at the University of the South and Southeast Pará in Brazil. Other researchers may be more convincing, but this could be rethinking.
I mean, to me, this seems like a very anthropocentric, human-centered idea of like, oh, no other animal can be like us. We're so unique in this world that only us humans can feel pleasure, can feel pain, can feel all these different emotions and feelings. It's very a selfish mindset. And yeah, I will say humans are definitely unique and special because heck, I'm talking into a device that other humans developed to. What is this truck in front of me doing? Whatever. Developed so we could spread information to each other. The ability to spread information is something uniquely human. It's not uniquely. It's not uniquely human. It's not uniquely human. We just do it in a very specific way, where our language is a lot more complex and our ideas are a lot more complex than what a normal animal can do. So I don't know. It makes sense. I mean, if you look at it from like an evolutionary perspective, the idea of pleasure probably extends far back beyond our common ancestors with like fish. Or at least our most recent common ancestor with fish. If scratching against a rock that gets rid of parasites feels good, which means that some ancient fish is more likely to do it more often and not get sick from parasites, that's going to provide an evolutionary advantage that they're going to pass on to their children and their children's children. So I don't know. It really just kind of shows the hubris of people.
In California.
And I'm Leila Faldin in Washington, D.C. Good morning. President Trump has revealed his latest plans to end the war in Ukraine.
In a post on his Truth Social network, Trump said he was setting up a direct meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky that would then be followed by talks between the two leaders and Trump. Now, the date and location are still unclear. That message followed a meeting at the White House on Monday where Trump hosted Zelensky and 7 European leaders to make progress on ending the war Russia launched in Ukraine.
We're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if this peace, the peace is going to stay long term.
You remember just days earlier, Trump met Putin in Moscow.
Only do long-term security guarantees, i.e. NATO.
And it's here to break it down for us. Good morning, Daniel. Hey, good morning. So what stood out to you with these White House brokered talks?
Well, first of all, it's just remarkable to have such a big group of world leaders come together on short notice, no less. And those leaders, they talked for hours yesterday. Trump and Zelensky met on their own, and then the other European leaders joined for talks. It was a scheduled meeting in the Eastern that then carried on later in the Oval Office. One other thing that stands out to me, though, now that it's over, is that the White House is trying to create the sense of momentum here. Immediately afterwards, Trump said he spoke with Putin, and that he had already started planning for Putin and Zelensky to meet face-to-face, and that trilateral meeting you mentioned.
Okay, and Ukraine and Europe want security guarantees to keep the peace in Ukraine if there's a deal.
Yep.
What progress did the leaders make on that?
Well, the leaders discussed this. Afterward, Trump said a guarantee would involve, as he put it, coordination from the U.S., but he didn't say specifically what that would mean. It's hard to know what to think of that without details. Trump also said yesterday that Putin is open to a guarantee, but again, we don't know what Russia is open to here. So a lot is up in the air there. But another thing the leaders discussed is the return of Ukrainian prisoners held in Russia, including children, and Trump said he thinks Putin is open to them.
Daniel, another central issue here is a ceasefire. At first, President Trump was pushing for an immediate ceasefire before any talks. Then he did an about-face after his meeting with Putin, and now he's been saying that he thinks they should just get into talks to work out a full peace deal. Did we hear more about this?
We heard a bit. We heard that Ukraine wants a ceasefire before further talks. And you did have Chancellor Merz of Germany and French President Macron really push for that. Now, without a ceasefire, Ukraine is concerned that Russia could drag out the war, continuing its attacks on Ukraine, even as peace deal talks continue. Trump, for his part, though, said yesterday that he doesn't oppose a ceasefire, but also that it's not necessary.
And what about the issue of land? Did the leaders discuss the possibility of Ukraine giving up land that Russia illegally took or occupies?
Well, at least in their public remarks, Trump was the only one who mentioned it, saying that Ukraine and Russia needed to talk about that based on the, quote, current line of contact. Now, land is a very contentious issue in these talks. Russia already annexed Crimea in 2014 and now wants more of eastern Ukraine, which Zelensky opposes.
Speaking of contentious issues, I didn't see the berating of Zelensky that we saw back in February when he came to the White House.
Right, yes, you did not have Zelensky and Trump get into any arguments. In fact, this meeting, Zelensky seemed to be deliberately showing deference, thanking Trump repeatedly. He also wore a suit, which is something that Trump said that he liked.
And here's Daniel Kurtzleben. Thank you, Daniel.
So surface level.
She's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia under President Obama, now Executive Director of the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. And we just heard about, especially at the end there, how President Zelensky wore a different outfit. I gotta admit, that's the first thing I noticed when he got out of the car at the White House, that he was wearing kind of a more formal jacket and trousers as opposed to his military look. And I think it seemed like he turned on the charm, and maybe more for the American people as much as it was for Trump and his cabinet in the Oval Office. What stood out to you for yesterday's meeting?
I think that's right, A. He came there ready to, flatter our president, express appreciation. Of course, I mean, everyone's grateful that President Trump wants
8 European leaders came to the White House with a problem.
Through his attire, through his, repeated thank yous, and he was much more relaxed as well, joking around about the attire.
It felt more like these European heads of states were more like feudal lords coming to see their king to try and get the king to talk to another monarch to stop killing their farmers and stealing their land. Which in a way you can make that analogy. But it really just feels like a lot of these guys over in Europe, the heads of state, which though they are kind of democracies and in ways they're more democratic than us since they run on parliamentary systems, are ultimately subservient to American interests and will bend over backwards to make the U.S. state happy over their own people.
Since World War II, it's violating, of course, the UN conventions, Geneva Conventions, UN Charter, etc. So to give Russia,
not to say we need peace in Ukraine, we need to get Russia out of Ukraine. That is definitely not what I'm not trying to get away from that point.
But the durable peace depends on security guarantee A, and this is where I worry about how the various parties define that.
Yeah, because it seems, and maybe I'm missing something, but it seems simple, right? The security guarantee would mean protection against more Russian aggression. If that's not what it boils down to, then I don't understand what it is.
Right, I mean, that means war for the Ukrainians. Because Vladimir Putin has not shown any sign, not in the things that he said publicly, not in what his media is saying, not in what President Trump's reported out of the meetings, not in the media leaks. He's not shown any inkling that he's changed his objective, which is to completely control Ukraine and wipe it as an independent political entity off the map. He wants to absorb it into the Russian Federation. And that is unacceptable under international law. It's unacceptable from the standpoint of European security. It's unacceptable in terms of what it shows the Chinese and others they can get away with. I mean, the stakes here are global.
Now, President Trump has also been talking about what he refers to as, quote, land swaps. I'm thinking that term, Evelyn, that means that two parties exchange something. Right. That doesn't seem like, what would Russia be exchanging in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, that might have worked when the Ukrainians still controlled Kursk, which is a region within Russia that they actually took, as they said, as President Zelensky himself said, as a bargaining chip. Well, now there's nothing for the Russians to give in return, and so it doesn't seem like a swap. It seems like a forfeiture on the part of the Ukrainians, if you talk about swapping.
Now, we might be accused right now, Evelyn, of having a very pessimistic conversation when it comes to Ukraine's near and long-term future, but do you see any hope based on the last few days?
It's pretty reasonable,
yes, I mean,
to be
first of all, our president is deeply engaged. That is important because the United States has all the cards. What I would like to see is that the United States put pressure back on Putin.
She realizes that what Trump is saying is a lie.
With Zelensky separately. President Putin does not see President Zelensky as an equal. So the idea of this bilateral meeting, I think, is highly unrealistic. Maybe if President Trump were to agree to attend, that would be a different story. The other question, of course,
so Putin and Trump can both shit on Zelensky together like Vance and Rubio did.
Have tried to assassinate President Zelensky multiple times. So the bilateral meeting, I don't think is possible. But we have a lot of cards. President Trump could put pressure on the Kremlin by slapping on sanctions, by saying if you don't do this, I will do that, or if you don't do this, I will. If you do this, I will lift sanctions. So I'm going to put sanctions on you now, Vladimir. You now have to come to the table and give us something, which is an agreement that, for example, Ukraine can enter NATO, or an agreement that there's a real Article 5 with U.S. and European troops stationed as tripwires in Ukraine agreement, something like that. But I think the pressure has to be put on the Kremlin, and then an incentive has to be given. Okay, we'll take the pressure off if there's a peace deal.
Evelyn Farkas is a former defense official and executive director of the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Ed.
Stop there for the day. It is funny, and other commenters have talked about it before, but man, that this whole situation probably would not have happened, or at least would not have happened in the same way, if it wasn't for the strategic disarmament of non-superpower nations. The forcing of Ukraine by the United States and Russia in the 2000s, I believe, to hand over their nuclear weapons, really just messed things up for Ukraine. Because though I am definitely not pro-nuclear war, and ultimately, if I had a choice between nuclear weapons existing and nuclear weapons not existing, I would much prefer the latter of them not existing. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in, and it hasn't been the world we lived in since the 1940s. But nukes and mutually assured destruction have created this scenario where if you're a country that has a nuclear weapon, you just don't get messed with, at least not when the same extent. Splinter cell operations may cause problems. Far right radical or even far left radical, but it's usually more far right radical groups backed by other states. What's the word I'm looking for? Spying services. Kind of like MK Ultra, not MK Ultra. Sorry. What are the British one is? I'm speaking out my butt on that one. I forget what they're called. Or the CIA. Things like that. KGB for Soviet Russia, groups that are backed by those organizations, they can have an effect. They can, do these small-scale attacks. But no nation is going to attack another nation with a nuclear weapon for their own safety and more, or even just for the safety of like the world, the power balance, right? Russia will not attack America unless Russia feels like it's on its last legs because of nuclear weapons. China will not attack America unless China feels like it is back into a complete corner because of nuclear weapons, right? So, Russia would have never attacked Ukraine if Ukraine still maintained custody of its nuclear weapons. Countries in the Middle East don't do full-on offensives on Israel because Israel has illegal nuclear weapons that it stole back in the second half of the 20th century. So, like, it's powerful. No one messes with North Korea because North Korea has nukes, right? So it is a very important thing to consider. I would like nuclear disarmament, but it's really not an option unless everyone does it, and there's no way everyone's going to do it unless, some radical, like absolutely radical global revolution happens, and I just don't think that is going to occur, unfortunately. And but we'll keep it there. It is a very important thing to keep in mind, and really explains why a lot of nations do go towards nuclear armament, because it provides a layer of security that a normal standing army can never measure up against, especially against large imperial forces like the United States and like Russia and like China. So we'll keep it there for the day. Y'all have a good one.